On September 10, 2001, the Twin Towers remained enduring elements of the Manhattan skyline after 28 years, structures that New Yorkers had grown accustomed to, even if affection was scarce. The fierce debates over their design had long subsided. The community they displaced was a distant memory. Demonstrations and legal challenges were relics of the past. By then, the towers thrived commercially, with office rents fetching top dollar and their viewing platform attracting millions of visitors each year. Controversy had evaporated. They simply existed as part of the landscape. Yet just a day afterward, the world shifted dramatically. The terrorist strikes turned these once despised edifices into cherished icons in an instant. Soon after, any negative commentary felt taboo. In the public's shared recollection, the towers stood as innocent casualties, their turbulent backstory erased by the tragedy. That backstory, however, was real and profound. Throughout their lifespan, the World Trade Center embodied all the flaws that detractors saw in U.S. city planning. The saga traces back to the 1960s, amid a severe downturn gripping New York City. In 1960, the urban giant showed clear cracks. The exodus was evident everywhere. Affluent households were fleeing to outlying areas at a rapid pace. The post-war trend of white flight persisted unabated, with the national highway network expanding. Travel from places like New Jersey, Westchester, and Long Island grew more feasible. Longtime urban dwellers swapped cramped flats for spacious ranch-style houses, complete with lawns and driveways. City revenues were shrinking as a result. Industrial employment was dwindling fast. Once bustling plants that sustained thousands shut down or moved to regions offering cheaper labor and less union power. The apparel sector contracted noticeably. Along Brooklyn's docks, the hum of dock workers and freight activity gave way to quiet as maritime trade shifted to updated New Jersey terminals, equipped for container handling. The strain hit Lower Manhattan hardest. After the workday ended, the Wall Street area turned eerily empty. Banks and trading firms buzzed with deals in outdated structures by day. But come 6 p.m., the avenues cleared out. Hardly anyone lived there. Eateries shuttered post-mealtime. Pre-war office high-rises from the 1920s and 1930s sweltered without central cooling. Their lifts crawled along. Layouts featured cramped floors ill-suited to contemporary business needs, which demanded vast areas for clerical teams and support functions. Leading financial firms pondered a full exodus from the district. Some had even hired consultants to assess shifts to midtown or office complexes in Connecticut and New Jersey suburbs. The data was persuasive. Outskirts offered bargain land prices. Building expenses ran lower. Top managers could commute by car. Ample, no-cost parking abounded. The area's viability hung in the balance. Its tight colonial-era roads choked under current volumes of vehicles. A lender seeking 50,000 contiguous square feet for support staff couldn't secure it downtown. Real estate prices mirrored the gloom. Values in the financial core flatlined or dropped, even as Midtown surged. Builders raised sleek skyscrapers of glass and metal on Park Avenue and 6th Avenue for relocating executives from below. The Seagram Building debuted in 1958 following Lever House in 1952. Such structures signaled progress. In contrast, Lower Manhattan evoked bygone eras. The mental toll rivaled the fiscal woes. New York had long prided itself as a dynamic hub in perpetual renewal. But by 1960, the prevailing story was one of stagnation. The post-war powerhouse of international banking now grappled with doubt. Cities like Los Angeles flourished, Houston grew boldly, and Boston remade itself through innovation and academia. New York seemed stuck as rivals advanced. It was against this backdrop that a determined figure with ample means emerged to pursue bold change. At age 45 in 1960, David Rockefeller had led Chase Manhattan Bank as president for 2 years, as the youngest offspring of John D. Rockefeller Jr., and a descendant of the Standard Oil magnate, who held the title of America's richest individual, David carried forward not only wealth, but a drive to mold society in line with his ideals. Chase's base lay in Lower Manhattan, where the bank held extensive properties. Rockefeller's stakes tied directly to the area's fortunes. Falling asset prices hurt the institution's portfolio. His push to revitalize the zone blended self-interest with broader purpose. Beyond business savvy, he held a deep faith in urban vitality, backed by studies in economics at the London School of Economics and a Ph.D. from the University of Chicago. He noticed how major international finance hubs were undergoing significant upgrades. London was recovering from the war's devastation, with fresh construction. Frankfurt was erecting contemporary banking structures. Tokyo was growing at a brisk pace. Yet New York appeared stagnant. Rockefeller was convinced that failing to update the area would jeopardize Lower Manhattan's status as the premier global financial hub. Back in 1958, he had urged Chase Manhattan to erect a fresh headquarters at One Chase Manhattan Plaza. This 60-story skyscraper debuted in 1961, serving as a bold affirmation of the district's potential. The structure included an expansive public plaza at ground level, a sharp break from the norm of maximizing every inch of lot space. Still, a single edifice wasn't enough to halt the neighborhood's downturn. Rockefeller realized that turning things around demanded a unified effort. That same year, 1958, he established the Downtown Lower Manhattan Association. This group united leaders from banking institutions, insurance providers, and property development companies, all with stakes in the financial zone. These individuals oversaw billions in resources and managed jobs for tens of thousands of workers. They echoed Rockefeller's view that the area required bold measures to endure. The association sponsored research initiatives. City planners and financial experts dissected the district's challenges. Their findings merely validated the obvious. Lower Manhattan called for updated office accommodations, improved transit systems, and incentives to keep residents around beyond the workday. What it truly needed was a flagship initiative, grand in scale, one that would demonstrate the area's viability moving forward. The group's blueprint was all-encompassing. It called for enhanced rail links, a refreshed harbor area, housing expansions, and above all, a sprawling commercial hub. At its heart stood the World Trade Center. This notion wasn't wholly original. Since the 1940s, experts had mulled over building a specialized venue for worldwide commerce. Such a unified site, complete with display areas and workspaces for import-export businesses, would streamline transactions and bolster New York's role in international markets. Various schemes had surfaced, only to fizzle out. They stalled due to shaky financials and a lack of any body equipped with the clout or funds to bring them to life. Rockefeller and his allies sought a collaborator with exceptional strengths. They required an entity able to consolidate vast land holdings via eminent domain, secure funding outside traditional private channels, and press on amid political pushback, all while sidestepping municipal regulations. They discovered these exact assets in the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Formed in 1921 as a bi-state body to oversee transport networks, the Port Authority stemmed from an interstate pact, endorsed by the legislatures of both New York and New Jersey, and affirmed by Congress. This distinctive setup endowed it with remarkable authority. It functioned autonomously from municipal or state oversight. It had the ability to float bonds secured by user fees. It wielded eminent domain to seize land. It dodged local zoning restrictions and construction rules. And it contributed nothing to property taxes. The Port Authority had already delivered icons like the George Washington Bridge, the Lincoln Tunnel, and the Holland Tunnel. It managed 3 key airports along with shipping docks and transit hubs. It ranked among America's mightiest public entities, though it faced scant scrutiny from the public. Its chief, Austin Tobin, had steered the agency since 1942, turning it into a formidable powerhouse. At age 59 in 1960, Tobin earned a reputation for his commanding approach and firm belief that the Port Authority outmatched politicians in understanding regional priorities. He had staunchly protected the agency's autonomy from ongoing bids by mayors and governors to rein it in. Under his watch, the organization boasted yearly earnings surpassing $200 million. Tobin craved a monumental achievement. While bridges and tunnels served practical ends, they lacked prestige. So when David Rockefeller pitched the idea of a World Trade Center development, Tobin recognized his chance. The alliance of Rockefeller's Downtown Lower Manhattan Association and Tobin's Port Authority set the course for all subsequent events. These figures possessed the muscle to reshape Lower Manhattan in line with their blueprint. They commanded funding sources, regulatory muscle, and ties straight to the governors in both states. What they didn't have yet was a concrete blueprint or site. Those elements would emerge soon enough, bringing resistance in their wake. The Port Authority's engagement elevated the World Trade Center from an abstract idea to a feasible endeavor. Austin Tobin pledged the agency's assets in March 1961. The official pact between the Port Authority and the states of New York and New Jersey was inked in 1962. With that, the initiative gained solid institutional support and official sanction. However, the initiative still needed a blueprint and an exact spot. Officials from the Port Authority brought on board architects to craft preliminary ideas. The initial plans differed greatly in scope and vision. Certain concepts suggested a simple setup for offices tied to commerce. In contrast, others aimed for something much more expansive. Austin Tobin sought a venture that could produce significant earnings to fund the Port Authority's broader activities. A limited-scale setup simply wouldn't meet that objective. The process of picking a site exposed the real scope of the endeavor. The Port Authority examined various spots in Lower Manhattan, assessing them according to ease of access, available area, and expenses for purchasing property. They ultimately picked a parcel on the western edge of Lower Manhattan, generally enclosed by Vesey Street on the north, Liberty Street on the south, Church Street on the east, and West Street on the west. This zone went by the name Radio Row. The moniker dated back to the 1920s, when modest electronics stores started gathering in the area. By 1960, Radio Row had grown into a bustling hub focused on electronics, radio gear, and similar merchandise. The district brimmed with compact enterprises. Family-run outlets filled the street-level spaces in weathered structures. A good number of the owners were newcomers to the country or their offspring, who had forged thriving operations via extended workdays and hands-on customer care. These stores offered radios, televisions, audio systems, electrical parts, and leftover military tech. Enthusiasts in electronics, amateur radio users, and skilled repair experts flocked to Radio Row for items unavailable elsewhere. The Port Authority's own assessments identified 323 business occupants in the zone, slated for clearance. When factoring in proprietors, staff, and those in modest production workshops on the upper levels, the total workforce reached about 30,000 individuals. These weren't failing operations. The majority turned a profit. Plenty had held their spots for generations. The structures were plain and ordinary. Most originated from the late 1800s or early 1900s. They consisted of brick edifices, rising 4 to 8 floors, designed for function over flare. To the Port Authority, they represented outdated edifices, squatting on prime real estate, that deserved a better purpose. The agency's reasoning was direct. Through eminent domain, they could seize the property, compensating owners at market rates. The projected expense for securing the land came to roughly $60 million. After demolition, the Port Authority planned to erect a huge office development that would yield leasing revenue for years to come. The financials seemed solid, yet the Port Authority overlooked the personal impact. The merchants and laborers of Radio Row represented real individuals with rooted existences, loyal clientele, and strong local bonds. Numerous owners had toiled in their spots for 2 or 3 decades. Their patrons knew precisely where to go. Relocating to another area would force a complete restart. The Port Authority required an architect capable of turning Tobin's grand ideas into tangible structures. They selected Minoru Yamasaki. This choice was revealed in September 1962. At 49, Yamasaki operated out of Detroit and gained recognition for designs blending modern techniques with ornamental touches. Among his projects stood the Lambert St. Louis Airport Terminal, boasting sweeping concrete vaults and graceful spans. As someone outside the New York scene, Yamasaki tackled the assignment with an unbiased perspective and no fixed notions about suitable constructions in the financial hub. The Port Authority granted him remarkable leeway. They desired a bold creation that would stand out boldly. They aimed for the planet's biggest office array. Yamasaki started drafting outlines. His first iterations showed groups of structures in diverse elevations. The Port Authority urged him to scale up. Tobin demanded optimal workspace and heights that would dominate views across the entire region. The pivotal moment arrived with Yamasaki's idea of paired skyscrapers. 2 matching 110-story spires standing adjacent. Each would reach 1,350 feet, eclipsing the Empire State Building by 100 feet, to claim the title of world's tallest. The pair would house 10 million square feet of office area, outstripping any rival development globally. The scheme was daring, trailblazing, and precisely aligned with Tobin's goals. It demanded fresh approaches in engineering. Such lofty heights brought hurdles no one had tackled previously. Yamasaki teamed up with structural specialist Leslie Robertson and the company Worthington, Skilling, Hell, and Jackson. Their collaboration yielded a tubular framework in which the outer walls would shoulder the bulk of the load. Perimeter steel columns, set close together, would form a weight-supporting exterior shell. This innovative method allowed for greater open space on the interiors, as it minimized the need for internal supports. It also produced the iconic look that would come to characterize the skyscrapers. Beyond that, the tube framework offered a key benefit in terms of cost efficiency, by relying on the outer walls to bear the main load. Developers could use less steel overall than in a conventional frame structure. Early projections put the total expense at $280 million for the full development. However, this was just an initial guess, and costs would climb significantly once plans were refined. Officials unveiled the concept to the public in January 1964. Illustrations depicted a pair of shining spires soaring over lower Manhattan, their surfaces reflecting the sun's rays. Promotional content from the Port Authority highlighted the financial upsides. The initiative would generate thousands of building jobs, deliver cutting-edge workspaces for 50,000 employees, and bolster New York's role as an international hub for finance. The Port Authority positioned the World Trade Center as a civic asset, a forward-looking commitment to urban progress. Most in the corporate world backed the endeavor. David Rockefeller and the Downtown Lower Manhattan Association had long pushed for such a transformative effort. Property investors spotted potential profits. Labor groups in construction looked forward to prolonged employment. Reactions from major organizations were generally favorable at first. Yet, the merchants along Radio Row viewed it through another lens. They perceived their district as collateral damage for an unwanted initiative. They regarded the Port Authority, an appointed body without voter oversight, as wielding state authority to appropriate their land, all to favor prospective business occupants. They watched their livelihoods vanish to pave the way for a venture that would profit outsiders at their expense. Resistance coalesced rapidly. Oscar Newman stepped up as the leading critic. He ran a modest electronics store on Cortlandt Street, right in Radio Row's core. Newman grasped right away that his enterprise was doomed. Relocating alone wouldn't retain his clientele. The area's unique focus drew visitors to the cluster of stores, not single outlets. Dispersing them citywide would dismantle the supportive network entirely. Teaming with fellow proprietors, Newman established the Downtown West Businessmen's Association to oppose the plan. They brought on attorneys, convened gatherings, and reached out to politicians. What they uncovered would influence the entire struggle ahead. The Port Authority operated largely beyond everyday political influence. It reported to the two states' governors together, and both, New York's Nelson Rockefeller and New Jersey's Richard Hughes, endorsed the World Trade Center. The court fight kicked off seriously in 1963. The Downtown West Businessmen's Association launched a case in state court, contesting the Port Authority's power to seize their holdings. The complaint rested on two core claims. For one, the challengers contended that the World Trade Center didn't qualify as a valid public aim warranting eminent domain. Under the Fifth Amendment, authorities could claim private land for public needs with fair payment. Think roads, education facilities, or spans over water. But this was essentially a corporate office hub rented out to firms, with occupants like financial institutions, insurers, and brokers. How did it stand apart from standard commercial ventures? For another, the group asserted that the Port Authority overstepped its founding scope. Established to manage transport links, it wasn't meant to venture into property building. Erecting the globe's biggest office setup strayed from its assigned role. The suit sought either a full halt to the work or a revocation of the agency's condemnation rights here. The contentions carried weight, debating if business-oriented offices truly served a public end remained murky. While judges often granted officials broad discretion in interpreting public benefit, boundaries existed. The Port Authority's Council countered that advancing global trade counted as a public goal, with the center fulfilling that aim. They downplayed the reality that much of the area would go to unrelated private entities as a minor detail. The matter progressed through judicial levels for 2 years. By 1965, New York's top court, the Court of Appeals, issued its ruling. It determined that the Port Authority stayed within its bounds. The panel bought the contention that boosting trade amounted to a proper public use. Though it noted private firms would fill the bulk of the space, the court deemed that insufficient to derail the effort. The court's decision paved the path for starting the teardown process. This setback hit the Radio Row merchants hard, leaving them in despair. They had pinned their hopes on the judiciary stepping in to defend their rights. In reality, the appeals ruling showed how much leeway government bodies enjoyed. When the Port Authority asserted that a development met a public need, judges would typically go along unless the assertion seemed utterly ridiculous. The merchants still had a single path forward. They could dig in and make the Port Authority drag them out by hand. Such defiance wouldn't halt the initiative, yet it might draw widespread notice. Come spring 1966, the Port Authority issued eviction warnings to every owner and renter in the targeted area. These gave a 90-day window to clear out. Payouts were offered, calculated via professional valuations. Building holders got sums for their structures, while renters were given moving stipends meant to offset relocation costs and income dips. These figures came from equations that boiled down personal upheaval to mere monetary values. A shop nurtured over years might fetch just a couple $1,000 in aid. The bulk of owners grabbed the cash and vacated. with dependents relying on them. Pressing on against the Port Authority felt futile. The judiciary had spoken. Elected officials backed the endeavor. By summertime, most Radio Row outlets had shuttered. Displays were papered up and liquidation notices popped up. The district started fading away, though a stubborn faction held firm. Oscar Newman and about 24 fellow proprietors remained. They ran their outlets amid the growing vacancies surrounding them. They signaled loudly that voluntary departure wasn't on the table. To claim their spots, the Port Authority would need to resort to compulsion. The agency anticipated pushback and looped in the New York City Police Department, securing officers for the removal operations. During scheduled dates in late 1966 and early 1967, cops joined Port Authority staff in approaching the holdout sites. The clearances turned tense, yet stayed non-violent. Proprietors barred their doors. Police broke in. Sellers perched at their stools or bolted themselves to equipment. Deputies hauled them outside and deposited them curbside. Stock remained inside for eventual clearance. In mere hours, once bustling storefronts sat vacant, fitted with fresh padlocks. The ousted keepers lingered on the pavement, eyeing as authorities sealed the doorways. Reporters documented certain removals. Images in print captured suited middle-aged guys led away from their enterprises by uniformed enforcers. These shots stirred compassion, but failed to alter the course. Sentiment from the public carried little weight against an entity insulated from standard electoral oversight. The Port Authority reported to a pair of governors, each eager for the World Trade Center's completion. With the structures cleared, the razing advanced swiftly. Demolition teams rolled in, wielding massive machinery. Full streets crumbled to debris over mere weeks. By summer's midpoint in 1967, Radio Row was gone. The 13 acres holding 323 enterprises and sustaining thousands of jobs lay leveled. Radio Row's erasure stood as an emblem of all that foes scorned in the era's city revitalization drives. Modest firms run by blue-collar households vanished to yield space for skyscrapers catering to big firms and affluent experts. The Port Authority had deployed state authority to favor corporate gains, all under the guise of communal benefit. The whole affair lacked true democratic input. Those upended in daily life got no real say. The tale of Radio Row caught the eye of city designers and reformers probing the foundations of nationwide redevelopment schemes. Jane Jacobs, in her 1961 volume, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, had contended that grand-scale schemes from on high wrecked the vibrant enclaves vital to urban vitality. Radio Row epitomized the sort of district Jacobs urged, preserving over erasing. Among architects, unease about the World Trade Center grew too. During early stages, detractors largely overlooked it. Yet with building underway and designs finalized for view, professionals raised alarms. Lewis Mumford, the noted critic and city thinker, unleashed a blistering piece on the spires in the New Yorker. He branded them symbols of empty-scale obsession and tech showboating. Mumford contended that erecting the globe's highest structures offered no real utility save for boosting egos. The venture embodied modern design's flaws, the notion that scale alone spelled superiority. Mumford likened the towers to oversized filing cabinets stuffed with people, treating them as mere components in an industrial machine, rather than spaces crafted to nurture human well-being. Ada Louise Huxtable, the New York Times' architecture reviewer, offered a more restrained yet still doubtful perspective. She recognized the demand for additional office space in Lower Manhattan, yet wondered if erecting a pair of 110-story skyscrapers truly addressed the issue. The sheer size was without parallel. Injecting 50,000 workers into a mere 16-acre plot would strain the nearby roads and transit networks beyond capacity. These structures would generate fierce wind tunnels, rendering the street-level surroundings uncomfortable and harsh. Huxtable's sharpest rebuke focused on how the towers clashed with human proportions. Good design ought to evoke a sense of connection, not dwarfing insignificance. At their immense height and bulk, the duo would appear incomprehensible to anyone standing below. The blueprint favored productivity and vast usable space above all, sidelining areas that might actually draw people in and encourage lingering. This backlash mirrored a growing evolution in design philosophy during the mid-1960s. The unyielding confidence of modernism, which had shaped the field since the 1920s, was starting to falter. Urban areas once eager for such bold strategies were realizing that towering blocks frequently resulted in lifeless, barren settings. Still, the objections from designers arrived after the point of no return for the World Trade Center. The Port Authority was fully invested. Agreements for building work were in place. The tear-down of existing structures had wrapped up. Altering direction now would incur financial hits in the tens of millions, plus the embarrassment of conceding an error. Austin Tobin had no intention of backing down. The initiative pressed on, undeterred by naysayers. Groundbreaking for the World Trade Center's foundation kicked off in August 1966, right away, revealing hurdles that would shape the entire build. The location rested on reclaimed ground, stretching toward the Hudson River. Over time, Manhattan's waterfront had inched outward through constant dumping of waste and fill into the waterway to forge fresh territory. Under Radio Row, the ground proved unreliable. Solid rock sat over 70 feet, down from the surface in most spots. Erecting the planet's loftiest buildings here demanded innovative fixes, never tested on such a grand stage. The dig had to plunge 7 levels beneath the pavement to hit bedrock and carve room for the subsurface utilities bolstering the towers. That involved hauling away more than 1.2 million cubic yards of soil and rubble. Yet the site's nearness to the Hudson posed a serious risk. Excavate without safeguards, and the pit would fill with river seepage through the earth. Engineers turned to a slurry wall method, adapted from tunnel projects but scaled up dramatically for the first time. Workers carved a 3-foot-wide, 70-foot-deep groove encircling the full boundary of the area. While digging, they filled it with a blend of water and bentonite clay. This thick mixture stabilized the sides against cave-ins and sealed out moisture. Upon reaching solid rock in a segment, teams inserted steel frames into the mix and added concrete. The pour pushed out the slurry, solidifying into a lasting barrier. Bit by bit, they erected a subterranean shield to resist both dirt pressure and flooding. Finishing the slurry wall spanned over a year. It dropped 70 feet under the street and anchored 15 feet into the rock, standing 3 feet thick with 152 segments. As digging proceeded within this secure enclosure, machinery extracted any leaking water from gaps between sections. The approach succeeded. All that extracted earth required disposal. The Port Authority addressed it by manufacturing more terrain. They deposited the dug-up material into the Hudson just south of the zone, gradually shoving Manhattan's edge 700 feet farther west across multiple years. This created what would later develop into Battery Park City, a mixed-use neighborhood that boosted Lower Manhattan by 92 acres. In essence, the World Trade Center endeavor stretched the island itself. Actual tower assembly started in 1968. The framework relied on a tubular setup, with densely packed steel pillars along the outer edges, bearing the primary load. These were spaced just 22 inches apart, yielding slim gaps for windows. Per tower, there were 240 such exterior pillars, 59 along each side. They came in factory-made pieces, fastened on site as the structure climbed. Inside, other supports framed the central hub housing lifts, stairwells, and equipment. From the outer shell to the inner spine, expansive steel beams stretched 60 feet uninterrupted. This allowed open-plan interiors adaptable to various office needs without obstructing columns. The timeline for completion was tightly paced. The assembly of the steel framework advanced rapidly, with a new level added every 3 days at the busiest times. Several cranes hoisted parts into position as ironworkers secured the joints with bolts. During the most intense phase of building, over 3,500 laborers worked on the site at once. Trailers for construction management, zones for storing materials, and amenities for the crew filled the nearby roads. Ensuring worker safety remained a perpetual challenge. Building skyscrapers carries inherent risks. Crews toiled at elevations of hundreds of feet, regardless of the weather. Even with established safety measures in place, accidents claimed lives on the project. When the work wrapped up, a total of 60 fatalities had occurred due to on-site mishaps. News of these losses spread, yet the building effort pressed on without interruption. The timeline stayed on track. The Port Authority exercised oversight across all elements of the endeavor. Austin Tobin had selected Malcolm Levy to lead the World Trade Department. Levy managed the building process, finances, and deadlines, answering straight to Tobin. This setup allowed for swift decision-making, free from the bureaucratic layers and permissions that bogged down public initiatives. Initial budget projections from 1962, set at $280 million, climbed sharply. By 1970, as the towers took shape, forecasts pegged the full expense at more than $650 million. These hikes stemmed from modifications to the plans, rising prices, and unexpected hurdles. Steel costs had gone up. Wages for labor had followed suit. Efforts on the slurry wall and base proved costlier than planned. To cover the extra expenses, the Port Authority issued more bonds. Revenue from tolls on the authority's bridges and tunnels supported the debt payments. Rising expenses sparked backlash from New York officials who contended that the funds might better serve housing, education, or transit systems, aiding everyday residents, instead of creating corporate workspaces. Port Authority officials countered that the World Trade Center would yield leasing revenue to cover the bonds and ultimately turn a profit. Time would tell if those economic forecasts held water. As the skyscrapers pierced the lower Manhattan horizon, they demanded attention. In 1970, the metal frames had scaled 50 levels and kept ascending. Visible from points throughout the wider city area, the structures were already shaping the urban silhouette prior to finishing. This prominence reignited debates among architects. Nearing their peak, the uniform exteriors stood out. Viewed from afar, the edifices resembled ruled paper, with one uniform story piled atop another, up to 110 levels. Slender windows heightened the upright lines but fostered uniformity. Detractors drew negative parallels to iconic New York high-rises, such as the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, featuring unique summits, tiered designs, and ornamental details. The Twin Towers lacked such flair. They embodied unadorned utility in their design, serving merely as towering shells for offices, adhering strictly to structural necessities without artistic flourishes. The effects on the local area emerged even as work continued. The enormous bases obstructed sightlines and altered airflow. Avenues once bathed in light now lingered in constant dimness. Open areas around the foundations stayed as bare paved surfaces, unable to support vegetation in the endless gloom. Adjacent neighborhoods faced heavier vehicle flow and bottlenecks from project trucks and personnel, straining the existing systems. Businesses that endured the early teardown phase soon grappled with building interruptions. Entry to structures got hampered by fencing. The racket from foundation hammers and machinery hindered daily commerce. The prolonged build-out seemed interminable. Merchants anticipating a boost from the World Trade Center influx instead saw visitors steering clear of the zone. Lower Manhattan transformed into a vast work site, perceived as hazardous and off-putting. Tensions persisted between the Port Authority and neighborhood advocates. Locals voicing worries over clamor, grit, or gridlock heard that the initiative advanced a broader purpose. The entity enjoyed legal protections, shielding it from many municipal rules. Standards for construction, land use, and ecological assessments, binding private builders, held less sway over the Port Authority. Come 1972, the outer cladding was almost done. Aluminum and glass panels sheathed the frameworks. The towers stood at their maximum of 1,350 feet across 110 floors. They claimed the title of world's tallest structures, although the Sears Tower in Chicago would eclipse them soon after. With the edifices nearing readiness, the ultimate price topped $900 million, over triple the first projection. When adjusted for inflation, the total came to about $6 billion in today's dollars, positioning the World Trade Center as one of history's priciest building endeavors. The Port Authority financed it through bonds that shouldered the full burden of the debt. Now the organization's fiscal health hinged on securing occupants for its 10 million square feet of office space. Tenants whose payments would handle the debt repayments, daily operations, and upkeep. Securing such renters turned out to be far tougher than expected. The North Tower made its official debut on December 23, 1970, even as work wrapped up on other parts. The dedication event included New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and New Jersey Governor William Cahill, with addresses highlighting the skyscrapers as emblems of worldwide trade and New York's enduring lead in international banking. Standing next to the governors, Austin Tobin, the Port Authority's executive director, who'd championed the initiative for almost 10 years, received accolades for creating the planet's biggest office hub. The event radiated assurance. Yet beneath the festive exterior, things looked far gloomier. The Port Authority struggled to attract lessees. The towers launched amid a deep economic slump and an oversaturated market for office space. Between the project's launch in the early 1960s and its finish in the early 1970s, New York's economy had deteriorated markedly. The finance sector was merging operations left and right. Banks trimmed their workforces. Wall Street faced headwinds. Firms the Port Authority counted on to vie for spots were shrinking or fleeing the city altogether. The empty space painted a clear picture. Upon the North Tower's opening, under 50% of its area was spoken for. Officials had banked on businesses rushing to lock in extended leases for sleek offices in the globe's highest structures. But potential occupants eyed the steep asking prices, glanced at cheaper empty suites scattered across Manhattan, and opted elsewhere. The Port Authority demanded top dollar for these novel edifices in a district many firms viewed as awkward to reach. The site's drawbacks hampered the towers. Midtown Manhattan had solidified as the go-to spot for company bases, boasting superior transit via Grand Central Terminal and Penn Station, plus abundant eateries, lodging, and entertainment nearby. Lower Manhattan lacked such perks. The financial zone cleared out post-workday. Dining choices were scarce. The area came across as cut off. Even the structures posed issues. The trailblazing tube framework, which had cut building costs, led to stifling workspaces. With slim windows only 22 inches apart, flanked by thick steel supports, the rooms felt cramped. Staff farther than 15 feet from the outer walls got scant daylight. Sealed panes and reliance on HVAC for airflow sparked ventilation woes. Elevator gripes surfaced right away. Hauling 50,000 people up and down 110 levels demanded an intricate setup that segmented the tower into sections. Riders hopped express lifts to sky lobbies at the 44th and 78th levels, then switched to locals for targeted floors. It sounded streamlined on paper, but proved irritating in reality. Reaching a high-floor workspace from the lobby might involve 2 or 3 stops, each with wait times. The trip from street to seat could stretch to 20 minutes. Gusts added more headaches. At 1,350 feet with few offsets, the towers rocked visibly during strong winds. High-level occupants sensed the movement. Documents skidding across tables, coffee spilling from mugs. The oscillation stayed safe, but it amplified the perception of the sites as unpleasant workplaces. The ground-level plaza morphed into a gale channel. Winds whipped up fiercely between the giants on stormy days, making crossings tough. Bursts tossed pedestrians askew, meant as a communal area for workers to linger. The space instead saw folks dashing through to escape. The Port Authority confronted a dire situation. Having sunk over $900 million in loans into the towers, it faced bond stipulations to generate enough cash for repayments. The plan relied heavily on leases to fund a big chunk of that, assuming heaps of untapped space. That premise crumbled fast. To cope, the agency shifted its own functions into the towers, relocating its main office to the North Tower. It then leaned on state and city bodies to shift their operations to the World Trade Center. State offices under New York were urged to shift from various sites to the towers. Certain private firms connected to the Port Authority were convinced to commit to leases. These strategies succeeded in lowering the apparent emptiness, but failed to address the core issue. In essence, the Port Authority was renting out space to its own divisions and to groups with no real option but to go along. The economic woes were made worse by the high costs of running the facilities. Keeping up such massive structures demanded huge outlays. Regulating the temperature across 10 million square feet used up vast quantities of power. Just servicing the elevators called for a full-time team. Even when fairly full, the towers were still operating at a deficit. As occupancy dipped under 50%, the red ink piled up. Backlash from architects grew sharper once people started using the buildings. Ada. Louise Huxtable revisited the topic in a 1973 New York Times piece. She noted that the towers now shaped the city's outline, yet wondered if they truly enhanced the scene. Impressive in their engineering, the structures fell short in design appeal. They showcased technical skill while overlooking what people actually needed. Some detractors held back nothing. Architecture scholar Manfredo Tafuri labeled them as structures boiled down to sheer volume, edifices that offered no message except their scale. British critic Rayner Banham saw them as oversized for no good reason. Skyscrapers built simply to reach great heights, without any real function demanding such stature. It was only a matter of time before comparisons arose to the Empire State Building, and they weren't kind. Finished in 1931, that iconic structure featured Art Deco flourishes and a striking spire that set it apart immediately. It had balance and personality. The Twin Towers, by contrast, seemed churned out by a computer program focused solely on maximizing usable floor space. The Empire State Building drew people's fondness. The Twin Towers stirred no such sentiment. The Port Authority's promotional campaigns highlighted the tower's importance to global commerce and their boost to New York's finances. Still, no amount of publicity could alter the on-the-ground truth. The towers loomed partly unoccupied as the city grappled with financial turmoil. Rather than heralding a comeback for Lower Manhattan, these structures turned into icons of bureaucratic overreach and flawed foresight. The South Tower's formal debut came in 1972, injecting yet another 4.5 million square feet of unused space into an already oversaturated market. Tenancy crept up gradually, but stayed far short of what was required to turn a profit. By 1973, with the pair fully built and running, the World Trade Center had turned into a heavy burden on the Port Authority's books. Revenue from the agency's other ventures, especially the steadily profitable bridges and tunnels, kept the towers afloat through internal transfers. Absent that support, the complex would have missed payments on its debt. The moment couldn't have been more inopportune. New York City was spiraling into a budget meltdown. After the 1973 OPEC oil crisis, the U.S. economy tipped into downturn. Joblessness climbed, prices surged, businesses trimmed expenses instead of growing. Demand for office space plummeted. Emptiness in Lower Manhattan topped 20%. The Twin Towers worsened matters by flooding the area with extra millions of square feet amid falling needs. The project drew fire from opponents of city planning approaches. It embodied all the flaws doubters saw in centralized decision-making. Appointed officials had taken over private land, raised a vibrant community, taken on almost $1 billion in loans and erected spaces few desired. Sold as a public good, it now forced taxpayers to foot the bill for deserted high-rises. The expected gains in jobs and growth never appeared. The towers endured as testaments to bad judgment. After years of mounting pressures, New York City's money troubles boiled over in 1975. Officials confronted potential insolvency, long-term overspending, the exodus of middle-income residents to outlying areas, and the erosion of factory work had carved an unbridgeable shortfall. Lenders balked at renewing the city's temporary borrowings. Cut off from funds, the municipality couldn't cover wages or essential operations. The drama hit headlines nationwide as default loomed. President Gerald Ford at first rejected aid from Washington. His stance got captured in a notorious New York Daily News banner, quote, "Zero." Washington stepped in eventually with backing for loans that staved off collapse, but only after the city enacted harsh cutbacks. Essential functions were gutted. Thousands lost jobs in policing and firefighting. Public transit suffered cuts as well. Green spaces fell into disrepair. The metropolis, once celebrated as the epitome of vibrant American city life, was plainly crumbling. Amid this downfall, the Twin Towers rose prominently, embodying misguided focus. The Port Authority had poured close to $1 billion into erecting these office complexes, which remained partially vacant. Even as the city struggled to maintain school operations or handle routine trash collection, these structures symbolized funds that might have served other purposes. Detractors argued that such investments could have supported enhancements to transportation, low-cost residences, or fixes to essential infrastructure, aiding everyday residents instead of corporate renters reluctant to occupy the offices. The Port Authority countered by emphasizing that its budget operated independently from the municipal one. The World Trade Center project relied on bonds secured by bridge and tunnel tolls rather than local taxes. While factually accurate, this explanation rang hollow on a human level. To the average citizen, it looked like influential entities were erecting grand landmarks while their hometown fell apart. The separation of Port Authority accounts from city coffers was a detail for bookkeepers, not for those witnessing their community's decline. By the 1970s, the towers had come to represent all that irked people about New York during that era. They stood for unchecked business influence, administrative overreach, and the neglect of fundamental community requirements. Moreover, they highlighted Minoru Yamasaki's approach, which favored large-scale endeavors over grassroots enhancements and assumed grand constructions alone could resolve deep-seated issues, ignoring underlying problems. The design itself fueled this view. Enormous, detached, and overbearing, the towers overshadowed Lower Manhattan like grave markers, signaling the demise of the city's self-assurance. Media and entertainment captured and heightened this disdain. In the 1976 King Kong remake, the towers served as the backdrop for the dramatic finale. The 1933 original featured Kong scaling the Empire State Building. Shifting to the era's newest skyscrapers updated the tale, but it also loaded the scene with deeper meaning. Back then, the Empire State evoked hope and triumph amid economic hardship. By 1976, the Twin Towers inspired no such uplift. They were simply the highest. Kong's assault on them unfolded as a cathartic vision of ruin, the gratifying sight of reviled edifices under attack. Additional movies portrayed the towers as icons of business alienation. TV series showed them as hubs where ruthless managers issued rulings that hurt regular folks. Visually, they coded for bureaucratic might unmoored from everyday realities. The Port Authority struggled to dispel this portrayal, rooted as it was in the tower's true backstory and stark aesthetics. Those who had protested the development in the 1960s felt their warnings proven right. Oscar Newman, the Radio Row merchant who battled the initiative back then, spoke to reporters about the devastation wrought. The demolition of 323 shops and the elimination of 30,000 positions were tangible losses. The vibrant district that vanished had been thriving. Officials at the Port Authority had vowed the World Trade Center would generate prosperity far exceeding those sacrifices. That commitment went unfulfilled. With the towers underutilized, the surrounding zone stayed barren once workers left for the day. Through the late 1970s, the Port Authority gradually boosted tenancy to around 80% by 1979, pressuring state offices and firms tied to government into commitments. Yet sustaining that rate demanded cross-funding from the agency's more lucrative ventures. Financially, the towers proved lackluster. One bright spot arrived with windows on the world, the eatery that debuted on the 106th and 107th floors of the North Tower in 1976. Boasting breathtaking panoramas and refined dining, it drew crowds for celebrations and professional schmoozing. Critics praised its menu. This venue showed the towers could host experiences people sought out, not just endured. Still, no single dining spot could offset the project's broader shortcomings. The South Tower's viewing platform pulled in sightseers but far short of projections. The Empire State Building's deck outshone it in popularity. Those sampling both often deemed the Twin Towers' vistas underwhelming, despite the extra elevation. The Empire State's elegant Art Deco style and storied legacy added charm beyond mere scenery. The Twin Towers delivered height and little else. The open areas at their foundation never lived up to expectations either. The Port Authority had originally planned for open plazas where office employees could mingle and public gatherings might take place. Yet in reality, these wind-battered open spaces stayed largely deserted. Efforts to liven them up with shows and displays achieved only modest results. Folks hurried across them en route to other destinations. The environment turned unwelcoming to people in subtle ways that expert landscape designers could have softened, though the engineering-driven approach overlooked such issues. The tower's influence on real estate prices in Lower Manhattan was uneven. Right nearby, the addition of 10 million square feet of competing office space drove down rental rates in surrounding structures. Owners of aging high-rises struggled to match the Port Authority's readiness to offer rents below prevailing levels. Certain properties in the financial area remained unoccupied. Further out, in districts like Tribeca, once dominated by industry, values started climbing as overflow demand sparked conversions of old warehouses. This wave of gentrification picked up speed during the 1980s and 1990s, though it was only emerging in the 1970s. By the close of the 1970s, the Twin Towers had integrated into New York's skyline without earning widespread fondness. They were instantly identifiable, featuring on souvenirs and visitor guides. Yet they stirred little warmth. Icons like the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and even the Woolworth Building evoked deep feelings among locals who viewed them as triumphs of design and emblems of urban heritage. The Twin Towers elicited scant emotion, maybe just frustration. Their permanence stemmed from the immense cost of demolition, not from any strong desire to keep them. The 1970s proved a grueling era for the city, marked by budget woes, surging crime, shrinking population, and fading stature. The towers debuted amid this downturn and ended up embodying it. They represented overreach, the faith in expert-driven fixes for intricate city challenges, and the rift between influential organizations and the neighborhoods they purported to benefit. Heading into the 1980s, there was no indication this image would shift. New York's resurgence in the 1980s brought economic rebound and slowly improved the Twin Towers' standing. The shift happened incrementally, via a buildup of minor adjustments that gradually altered views. Structures that had launched amid slump and civic turmoil now loomed over a metropolis rediscovering its poise and prosperity. The U.S. economy recovered from the harsh early 1980s slump. Borrowing costs fell, business earnings rose. The finance sector boomed spectacularly. Wall Street outfits grew rapidly. Banks, trading firms, and legal practices supporting finance all sought extra workspace. The emptiness that had troubled Lower Manhattan in the 1970s flipped around. By the mid-1980s, prime office spots in the financial zone saw strong interest. The Twin Towers reaped the rewards of this turnaround. The Port Authority at last drew tenants eager to rent without needing pressure. Prominent finance companies inked multi-year deals for full levels. After years of partial use, the buildings neared complete fill. By 1985, availability at both towers dropped below 5%. The Port Authority's revenue forecasts, dismissed as wildly hopeful back in 1973, at last came true. Leasing proceeds turned the World Trade Center from a money pit into a revenue source. Officials could now report gains instead of losses. The debt from building it was handled with ease. What detractors had labeled a disastrous error was delivering the payoffs Austin Tobin had foreseen 2 decades prior. Though Tobin had passed away in 1978, this success affirmed his conviction that bold moves could rejuvenate Lower Manhattan. Prosperity reshaped discussions of the towers. No longer emblems of extravagance and arrogance, they anchored a vibrant finance hub. The daily influx of professionals in the towers meant lucrative positions that boosted taxes and sustained local commerce. Eateries, retailers, and amenities sprang up to cater to the expanding staff. Lower Manhattan gained around-the-clock energy missing from the prior decade. The towers grew more user-friendly too, as residents and operators tackled initial flaws. Smarter lift operations cut down on delays. Upgrades to air handling fixed gripes about indoor climate. Staff grew more attuned to renter needs. Although the towers never achieved the affectionate status of the Empire State Building, they gradually earned recognition as reliable office spaces. Staff members ceased their gripes about the work environment. The thrill of the elevation and the panoramas from higher levels turned into attractive features instead of stress inducers. The viewing platform grew into a legitimate draw for sightseers. In the closing years of the 1980s, over 1 million people each year shelled out fees to ascend via elevators to the summit of the South Tower. While it couldn't rival the Empire State Building's crowds, the deck carved out its niche as a must-visit spot for those seeking the ultimate vista of the metropolis. The Port Authority promoted the outing shrewdly, highlighting the one-of-a-kind outlook unavailable elsewhere. Windows on the World cemented its reputation among New York's top dining venues. It gained fame for accommodating key corporate gatherings, marking milestones and wowing guests from afar. The spot brought in considerable income for the Port Authority and fostered favorable links to the towers, a stark contrast to the negativity of the 1970s. Reviewers kept lauding the food and hospitality. The venue's design, featuring expansive windows overlooking the harbor and skyline, delivered a dining adventure unmatched by competitors. In popular media, portrayals of the towers shifted noticeably. Movies and TV programs showed them as routine elements of the New York horizon, not emblems of corporate malice or administrative shortcomings. They popped up in love stories, thrillers, and serious plots devoid of backlash. They just existed as familiar icons setting the backdrop for scenes. This change was understated, yet profound. The structures were settling into the fabric of New York's cultural identity, free of debate. Architectural critiques didn't vanish completely, but they faded into the background. By the late 1980s, discussions centered on the tower's economic contributions to the city, rather than their visual appeal. Detractors from the 1970s had turned their focus elsewhere. The Twin Towers slipped from the spotlight of ongoing scrutiny. They turned into accepted realities, beyond dispute. The February 26, 1993, bombing disrupted any sense of security in the towers. Terrorists set off a truck bomb in the subterranean garage under the North Tower, resulting in 6 deaths and over 1,000 injuries. The blast carved out a multi-level pit and cut electricity to the entire complex. Fumes invaded the elevator banks and escape routes. Thousands of employees fled in the pitch black via cramped staircases, a process that dragged on for hours. Individuals stuck in lifts or on compromised levels above were freed only through prolonged efforts by emergency responders. The event exposed the tower's weaknesses. Though engineered to endure storms, blazes, and even plane collisions, the garage lacked robust safeguards. It was easy for someone to park an explosive-laden vehicle below and trigger it. The Port Authority reacted swiftly with upgraded protections. Entry to subterranean zones by cars was curtailed. Inspection protocols were bolstered. Structural fixes wrapped up in mere months. Yet the emotional toll lingered. Surprisingly, the assault sparked solidarity from New York residents. After the strike on the towers, the public united in support. Long-despised edifices abruptly symbolized endurance. Employees resumed work in short order, proving that fear wouldn't displace them. The Port Authority issued assurances on the structure's sturdiness and protection. The intent was unmistakable. Violence wouldn't break the buildings. This episode hinted at dangers that most couldn't yet grasp. The 1993 perpetrators aimed to collapse one tower onto its twin, potentially claiming tens of thousands of lives. Their scheme flopped since the device, despite its force, wasn't ideally placed and lacked the potency to undermine the core framework. Probes uncovered a meticulous plot by militants with overseas ties. The World Trade Center was chosen deliberately as a stand-in for U.S. financial might. The aftermath crafted a storyline about the towers that would grow stronger in the years ahead. They evolved beyond mere workplaces. They embodied U.S. commerce and worldwide sway. Being singled out for demolition by extremists elevated their stature far beyond design or city layout. The edifices stood for broader ideals. Throughout the 1990s, the financial hub kept prospering steadily. The surge in dot-com ventures drew tech enterprises to downtown Manhattan. Banking and financial operations grew even larger. The Twin Towers enjoyed complete tenancy across those years. Leasing costs rose sharply, since space needs far outpaced what's available. The Port Authority set top-tier rents, capturing the structure's renown alongside the shortage of similar options in the district. The towers popped up more often in promotional campaigns for New York travel and commerce. Their unique paired outlines turned into global icons, easy to spot anywhere. The cityscape dominated by the towers shaped New York's image like nothing else could alone. Souvenirs like cards, prints, and ads turned to the towers as quick stand-ins for the metropolis. The structures had reached what designers term landmark prominence, a standout presence so memorable that it fuses with its surroundings. By the year 2000, the shift was total. The towers, once loathed by New York for years, were now cherished as emblems of urban rebound and affluence. They stood for the finance world's command, the metropolis's revival post-1970s turmoil, and its role as an international powerhouse. Sure, the design remained uniform and the size still daunted, yet those traits faded in relevance. The towers had validated themselves via commercial triumphs and enduring the 1993 assault. Folks who recalled Radio Row were getting on in years. Disputes about land seizures were now just past events. Critiques from figures like Louis Mumford and Ada Louise Huxtable seemed old-fashioned, relics from a time when modernist styles faced real debate. The towers existed as unassailable realities, needing no defense. They functioned, they brought in profits, they supported jobs for tens of thousands, they pulled in visitors, they shaped the horizon. As summer 2001 unfolded, the World Trade Center neared its 30-year mark. After 30 years marked by disputes, setbacks, and slow turnaround, the buildings had earned widespread approval. Loathing gave way to routine, then tolerance, and at last, a hint of local esteem. The towers fulfilled the vision their builders always held, vital parts of New York's business backbone and icons of its stature. No one foresaw how just 3 months later, it all would transform irreversibly. September 11th, 2001, dawned like any typical Tuesday. Employees streamed into the World Trade Center just as they had countless times prior. Lifts whisked them up to workplaces across the pair of towers, mugs filled with coffee. Screens flickered to life. The towers buzzed with the daily rhythm of about 50,000 workers, starting their shifts in structures that, after 3 decades of strife, had at last succeeded. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower, hitting between the 93rd and 99th levels. The Boeing 767 hurtled at roughly 465 miles per hour. The crash cut lift lines, wrecked escape routes, and set off fires from thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. All aboard the plane perished right away. Those on levels above the strike were sealed in. Wreckage tumbled to the ground below. Plumes of smoke billowed from the huge tear on the tower's northern side. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors. This second hit erased any chance it was mere chance. The towers faced deliberate assault. Thousands inside both started fleeing via backup stairs. A few on lower levels below the strikes escaped, but none from the upper sections in either building made it. Planes had demolished stairs and lifts, or flames and rubble blocked them solid. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower gave way. After 28 years upright, it crumbled in about 10 seconds. The fall started at the strike levels. Unsupported upper sections dropped onto those beneath, their mass overwhelming the weakened frame. Each failing level built speed and force. The whole edifice pancaked downward in a chain reaction, kicking up a huge plume of dust that roared across downtown streets. All remaining inside the South Tower lost their lives. Scores of rescue workers inside perished too. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower fell similarly. It had blazed for 102 minutes. Heat had sapped the steel's strength until it couldn't hold the load. The downfall echoed the South's, a chain of breakdowns that toppled every one of the 110 floors in moments. All trapped within died. Additional rescuers fell as well. The structures that required 4 years of construction and nearly 3 decades to earn public approval were obliterated in under 2 hours. That location turned into Ground Zero, a phrase drawn from atomic bomb terminology for the epicenter of devastation. The 16-acre area, previously home to Radio Row and later the Twin Towers, lay reduced to mangled metal and crushed rubble. The wreckage smoldered for months. The final count of lives lost climbed to 2,753, encompassing office employees, guests, 343 firefighters, and 71 law enforcement personnel. Overnight, the assaults elevated the Twin Towers from divisive edifices to hallowed icons. The decades-long backlash that had shaped their reputation vanished from collective recollection. Debates over their design faded into obscurity. The financial hardships of the 1970s slipped from view. References to Radio Row's demolition all but disappeared. What lingered was the vivid scene of the towers under siege, individuals stranded high above the strike areas, and the terror of their downfall. From then on, the structures were characterized solely by their violent end and the victims within. Today's memorial at the site embodies this shift. Twin reflecting pools trace the precise outlines of the original buildings. The 2,977 victims' names are etched on bronze surfaces encircling the water. The area fosters reflection and sorrow. No nod is given to the disputes that marked the tower's erection. The 3 decades of resentment and scrutiny go unmentioned. Instead, the memorial portrays the towers as blameless casualties of sudden aggression, which they indeed were. Yet it streamlines their past by wiping away all that preceded September 11th. Such selective forgetting makes sense in the face of mourning. Paying tribute to the departed demands narrowing focus to the pain, not the tangled truths. Still, this omission has consequences. The true story of the Twin Towers holds valuable insights into city planning, the wielding of state authority, and the interplay between organizations and local groups. Those insights vanish when the narrative shrinks to one of sacrifice. Radio Row functioned as a vibrant community, raised to make way for the towers. Oscar Newman and the 323 entrepreneurs who forfeited their operations were flesh and blood individuals. Their means of support offered up for a venture benefiting different priorities. The Port Authority's invocation of eminent domain sparked enduring queries on the boundaries of official might. The raising of that district for the towers, followed by the tower's own ruin in the assaults, represent dual misfortunes. They don't offset one another. The design critiques were valid. The towers felt monotonous, oppressively massive, and oblivious to pedestrian comfort at ground level. The surrounding plazas felt unwelcoming. The architecture generated gusty winds at street height. These were clear shortcomings. Recognizing them doesn't diminish the memory of those who perished there. It honors an honest assessment of what the buildings truly were. The monetary woes were undeniable. They debuted amid downturn and remained underutilized for years. The Port Authority relied on toll income transfers to sustain the endeavor. In effect, public funds propped up vacant skyscrapers while the city slashed vital programs. This muddies the portrayal of the towers as emblems of U.S. prosperity. They did thrive in time, but only after prolonged setbacks. Such a turnaround shows how catastrophe reshapes the past. Prior to September 11th, these were contentious creations that had clawed their way to legitimacy via commercial viability. Post-attack, they attained reverence. The nuanced backstory yielded to a tidy tale. The towers were eternally destined, perpetually cherished. It's a tale that tugs at the heart but distorts the record. In truth, edifices are products of their era. They arise from particular individuals pursuing defined goals amid clashes and concessions. The Twin Towers fit that mold. Born from urgency among executives and officials convinced that Lower Manhattan demanded bold revival, they were crafted by designers favoring structural prowess over everyday usability. Erected by leveling a resistant neighborhood, they launched into turmoil and faltered for years before eventual fiscal and social embrace. Then came their annihilation. Every element coexists as fact. The towers embodied bureaucratic overreach, yet also endurance. They erased Radio Row, while breathing new life into Lower Manhattan, Flawed in form, they evolved into enduring symbols. Despised, then tolerated, then lost, then revered. History defies simplicity. Even catastrophe can't erase that intricate legacy. Though reflection often calls for streamlining the narrative, the reflecting pools at Ground Zero stand out as both elegant and fitting tributes. They offer a place for mourning and reflection, paying solemn respect to those who perished. Yet within this commemoration, we must also recognize the broader context. Oscar Newman, whose opposition to the tower's development cost him his livelihood through eminent domain, merits inclusion among the September 11th victims in our collective memory. The vendors of Radio Row, forced from their shops, warrant their due acknowledgement. Those architectural voices who highlighted the structure's shortcomings proved prescient. What turned into hallowed ground amid horror was erected amid fierce disputes, endured years of scorn, and only found vindication in calamity. The Twin Towers' tale mirrors how authority molds urban landscapes, how bureaucratic choices ripple through neighborhoods, how edifices evolve into emblems with shifting significance over time. It's an account of the arrogance in grand-scale ventures and history's capricious turns. It's about how devastation reshapes significance. Grasping this backstory doesn't lessen the devastation of September 11th. Rather, it deepens our grasp of the irreplaceable and its profound impact. Those towers were never straightforward icons. They embodied tangled legacies in steel and glass. That layered truth is what we should hold on to.